Greetings and welcome, managers and leaders across the world, to my expatriate presentation regarding the Philippines. My name is Alan Shepard, and I'm an MBA student at Southeastern University taking a class called Leading Across Cultures, and I want to thank Dr. Rome for this opportunity to do this research. The Philippines, as you can see, are a beautiful country, a culture made up of laughter, beautiful children, dancing, hunting, and as you can see, even exotic food here in the bottom corner. In this presentation, we're going to kind of talk about several things to do with the culture of the Philippines. First, we're going to talk about why the Philippines. We're going to talk about the islands, the geography, the government, the religion. Then we're going to go over the Hofstede model and the scores, why I even chose the Hofstede model. We're going to talk about the 6 dimensions of the Hofstede model, the differences between the Philippines and the United States, how we are similar, and we're even going to talk about communication, motivation, and teamwork in the Philippines and how that would work and what you may need to know before going. And then last but not least, we're going to cover a biblical perspective and why it's important to recognize our differences but also value our similarities. So, why the Philippines? Well, about a month ago, I took a missions trip here in the United States to the state of West Virginia in Huntington and was meeting with a pastor. And talking with a pastor, he goes to the Philippines on a missions trip about every 2 years. And so it intrigued my interest, and I've always enjoyed missions trips and traveling the world. And so I asked him that. I said, well, what does it take to go to a country like that? You know, what's the cost? What's the culture like? And he filled my ear with all kinds of stories and just piqued my interest. So starting with that, I've always wanted to go to the Pacific Islands, and I have friends that are even from the Philippines that I grew up with in high school. Some of them were on the same basketball team with me at my varsity high school. And so talking with them, getting to know them, seeing the differences even back whenever I was a teenager to now, it always piqued my interest to meet these people. I even have a friend who is actually a professor at Southeastern, Dr. Van Wy, who did do missions in the Philippines for a period of about 2 years, and I've been able to hear his stories of encounters with various wild animals and feeding the children and running things like a soup kitchen and doing all of those amazing and awesome things there in the Philippines. And so I decided that this would be the best country for me to talk about because it is very likely to be a country that I'll be visiting in the next 2 years. If you look at the entire map of the world, starting here, this is North America and South America. Here we are in Florida, at least this is where I am. The Philippines are literally on the other side of the world. You have to go way across here, past Africa and Europe, and on the other side of Asia to see it. This little tiny dot, this black dot, if you can see it, is the Philippines. It's right under China and right north of Indonesia. To get a closer look here, let's look at this map. Here is the Philippines. This is what I would call the islands. It's not just a island, it's the islands. As a matter of fact, it's actually about 7,641 islands make up the Philippines. You can see here looking at the capital city, Manila, and right next to the capital city there's a famous city called Quezon City. In the north there's Luzon, to the south there's Cebu City and Davao. And so as you can see, they're very close to Malaysia. To the west of them is the South China Sea, and to the north, as I stated earlier, is China. So this is the Philippines. This land is beautiful, but it is also dangerous at times. It's prone to earthquakes and typhoons, but also it is endowed with abundant natural resources. And the whole entire scope, all 7,000, almost 8,000 islands that make up the Philippines, there's about 100 million people that live here. And then there are about 10 million other people that live outside of the Philippines, but that are considered Filipino, and this is home to them. They're a member of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, even the East Asia Summit. So they are a part of a lot of things. They're actually one of the founding members of the United Nations. And it's considered to be an emerging market in the Philippines, a newly industrialized country, has an economy transitioning from being one based on agriculture to one based more on services and manufacturing, which is a plus for the Philippines. And it seems like a trending upward economy right now going on. Interestingly, about the Philippines, it is one of only two nations in Asia that are predominantly Christian. So the national religion in the Philippines is Christianity, and that is a pretty awesome thing for missionaries like Dr. Van Wy going over there to visit this country. For this presentation, for the purposes of research, I found that the Hofstede model would be the best model to choose. The Trampanyar's model gave great information, and his dimensions were helpful, as well as the globe study, but Hofstede seems to be the base of all the research. His dimensions really define the differences between cultures and really point out the similarities, and it's just a more, I feel, bordered and grounded research on the Philippines, and I gained a lot of insight on Hofstede's article, Dimensionalizing in Culture, on why to choose the Hofstede model, and it really pointed out some things to me on how similar really the globe study could be, but sometimes maybe not as accurate as what the Hofstede study is. I found it to be the most effective. So here are the scores. Hofstede has 6 dimensions. There's power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and the far one on the other side is indulgence. So the main thing I want you to view from this slide is the 3 major differences and the 3 major similarities. The similarities are very easy. You can see them right here. Masculinity, very similar, both countries, USA and Philippines. The Philippines, by the way, is in the orange, and the USA is in the blue. So the Philippines are slightly higher in masculinity, but right there next to each other, as well as uncertainty and avoidance. We're right there, we're very similar scores. Long-term orientation, same thing, similar scores. But check out the difference in indulgence down there. The USA is quite a bit higher than the Philippines in indulgence score, which would point out a pretty major difference, significant difference that we have to recognize. Now, look at power distance. Look at this huge gap. The USA is scoring about 40 here on power distance, and the Philippines are sky high, one of the highest nations in power distance at a 94. That's going to point out a major difference that we have to recognize as managers and leaders going to a country like the Philippines. And then there's individualism. This is the greatest difference. This is the largest gap between us, Americans, and the Philippines, and we have to recognize this as leaders. So let's start with power distance. We're going to go directly in order here. The Philippines score a 94 and the US score a 40. This is a huge difference. It's the second largest difference out of all of Hofstede's dimensions between us and the Philippines. The Philippines are an extremely high power distance culture. People accept that power is distributed unequally. They accept it. They're a hierarchical society, and everyone there has a ranking. They understand that the person in power is in power for a reason, and to them, in their mindset, we ought to listen to them and look to them for insight and wisdom. That someone is in a position because maybe their family line leads back to someone who did a great thing or an awesome, significant, turn in the economy or in the country, or recognized for some reason, and so their family lines go down, and whoever is the leader for a reason, and they as subordinates in the Philippines, they would look and seek what to do from the leader. This is a major difference from us Americans, because to us, the boss is only the boss at work, but to the Philippines, the boss is the boss, whether he's at work or whether we're not at work. Then there's individualism. As stated earlier, this is the major difference. This is the greatest gap between us and the Philippines, according to Hofstede's research. We score a 91 and the Philippines score a 32. Now the U.S. Is the #1 country when it comes to their score of individualism. We are the highest individualistic society known to man. The Philippines are the other end of the spectrum. They are as almost all other Asian countries, they are a low score when it comes to individualism. They're collectivist culture. Their view of life is we, not I. That's totally opposite of us as Americans, and it's almost hard to wrap our minds around that. But they view everything as management of groups, not management of individuals. In other words, it is not so much what I would want, but what would the group want. Not so much what the one individual would want or do it for the one, but do it for the group. The group as a whole is the most important aspect to be looked at and to manage. It's management of groups. It's very different and very important for us to recognize, if not probably the most important thing for us to recognize if we're going to do any kind of leadership or management in this Asian culture. Loyalty to the group is so vital. The third dimension is masculinity. Now here is a great similarity. The Philippines score a 64 and the U.S. score a 62. Just slightly more masculine than we are, apparently. And the idea here is that you live in order to work. Now that is very similar to us Americans. As you can see by the scores, but also just think about it. Live in order to work. Americans value their job. We identify ourselves based on what kind of job we have, and our success is directly related to our profession. It would be the same way in the Philippines, and so going over there, it's a very decisive and assertive culture. Confrontation is usually dealt with by fighting it out and to see who would win the argument, and that is something that we would not struggle with, and neither would they. When it comes to uncertainty and avoidance, it's basically, this is the area of dealing with the unknown and the anxiety of it. The Philippines are 44, the U.S. are 46 on Hofstede's dimension when it comes to this. Basically, this means that neither one of us, we want no more rules than what's necessary. Deviance from the norm is not supernatural, and flexible schedules are something that we kind of value. We're not necessarily afraid of the unknown. We're not on the direct opposite of it, but we're kind of in the middle. We're almost like, if it's deviance from the norm, if it's something unusual, something that we really don't know about, we're okay with it, and we'll kind of cope with that. Same thing with them. Here's another great similarity. This is the closest one. Philippines scored a 27. We scored a 26 in our long-term orientation. We are both very focused on today, on the present. This could lead to sometimes traditional societies and a need for absolute truth, but it's the total idea of now, not later. We as Americans are very focused on the present, where that's the upcoming and latest technology. Same thing with the Philippines. They want quick results. They want it done now. That's the idea. Indulgence. Here's a score where we differ. Philippines 42, United States 68. This is basically the idea of how much do people restrain from desire. What's the extent that we are to be disciplined? Leisure is not the desire in the Philippines. It would be the desire for us Americans. We value that time away from work. Though we identify ourselves by our jobs, we value the time away from work. The Philippines is not so much. The USA may be found impulsive to the Philippines. The Philippines are very much a restraint culture. So they are known to be kind of more disciplined when it comes to showing up and working and doing the thing. Now, here is the big three. This is communication, motivation, teamwork. Starting with communication. In the Philippines, the leader is the guru of wisdom. They look up to the leader as that. It's a large power distance culture, which explains this. Hofstede uses an example in his book, Cultures and Organizations, on page 72, of a teacher having to, in a country like the Philippines, having to basically direct the conversation instead of, like in the United States, the students often are the ones who direct the conversations, and we open the conversation to the student to see kind of where it will go, what questions will they ask. Well, in the Philippines, this will be very different in communication-wise. It is not about so much what the subordinate has questions about, but what the leader says, what the manager says. That's what's important. He is, or she would be, the guru of wisdom. Now, when it comes to motivation, the Philippines and the United States actually have a lot of similarities. We're both masculine cultures. We're both a performance society. We are highly motivated by achievement and the capacity to get things accomplished. This identifies in both areas, so that to be motivated for a Philippine or for a manager going to the Philippines to lead other managers, we would have a similar idea of what motivates us 9 times out of 10. Now, the greatest challenge for us all will be how we do teamwork. Teamwork is basically the challenge because the Philippines, as noted earlier, is not an individualistic society like the USA. They are the direct opposite. They're collectivists, and to them, they're community-oriented. As are most other Asian cultures, this directly affects the way that people do teamwork because everything that is done with the group in mind. And as a manager going to the Philippines, you're going to need to identify that difference and know that it's going to take a matter of you going there and working with them, not vice versa. You're going to be the guest. You're going to go to their country and do teamwork. So you have to do teamwork the way that they do teamwork, not so much the way that the Americans do teamwork. Last but not least, we're going to do a biblical perspective. Now, I just want to say on the topic of diversity and culture and leading across cultures, diversity is awesome. Imagine a world without it. Imagine a world without flavor, one without real, genuine difference in substance. What if we were all alike, the same size, the same color, the same language? Seemed like actually that didn't go so well in the Tower of Babel. I mean, think if we all did the same thing. I love like seasonings. Just think of that, like salt. Salt is good, but what if all you had was salt? If everything was salty, that would get old, that would get tiring. Diversity is good. Regarding cultural differences, though, we all have one thing in common, and Malachi 2:10 points this out. He says, "Have not we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers?" I think one important thing for managers to realize going to a foreign country like the Philippines is that we may be different. We may view teamwork different. We may have differences in the way that we communicate with one another and communicate with subordinates and communicate with our leaders. But we all have one thing in common. We're all made by the same God, and we all have the same Heavenly Father, and that's important. In conclusion, the Philippines are an island, or are a group of islands that have beautiful culture and people. The geography of the islands are stunning. They're just located in one of the greatest places in the world, right there in the Pacific Islands, where temperatures are awesome, and even though there may be things like earthquakes and typhoons. The Hofstede model really paints an accurate picture of the Philippines and what we need to know going there. The United States has many similarities, but there are very important differences that we need to remember, such as individualism and collectivism. All in all, this is a wonderful place to go and do business with cross-culturally. I just want to show you my reference page, Holy Bible at the top for that last slide, and then this was probably the most important reference is the Hofstede Center. I used it for virtually every slide, every idea, communication, motivation, teamwork, all 6 dimensions. It just kind of really captures it well. This is the reason why I chose the Hofstede model, because of this tool. I used the book, Cultures and Organizations, Software of the Mind. I used an article online, Dimensionalizing Cultures. I used another article, Why Did the Globe Study? This is what persuaded me to use Hofstede. And then I used directly the website of the CIA.gov to pull geographic and government and religious research on the Philippines. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something.